Morning, everybody. How are we? Good? Great, brilliant. One person's great. You're all very welcome to the Foundry this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carl Lumsden, and I'm looking after the Breakfast Briefing series this year. So you're all very welcome. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I do see a lot of new faces, actually. So quick show of hands. How many people are here for the very, very first time? Yeah, I thought there's a good half of the room there. So you're all very welcome. And we hope to see you at some more breakfast briefings as well. So we're halfway through the year. We're probably a little bit more than halfway through the year. Into H2. Retail planning probably for a lot of you guys now already. Going to start getting ready to get our plans in place for the busy holiday period. So with that in mind, today is going to be a little bit of a different direction probably to what we've done for some of the other breakfast briefings. Previously throughout the year, what we focused on has been a lot of how can we get people to your website? How can we enhance our mobile strategy to find people at the right time and get them to your website? How can we develop better audience interpretation to find the right people in the first place and again get them to your website? A little bit of a different direction today. It's all about what can we learn from people when they get to your website? How long are they spending on your website? How long are they spending on certain pages? What devices are they coming to us from? What websites were they on before they got to your website? Where are they going after they go to your website? Are they going to competitors? Are they going to different suppliers and things like that? So it's a little bit of a different direction, but it's still really, really important for us to learn from that so that we can enhance and enrich our strategy going into, as I said, that busy holiday period for a lot of retailers. So a couple of house rules just before we kick it off. So I should say, and we haven't called out for the last while, if anyone is posting any pictures or something like that, the hashtag is #GoogleBB. If you want to post any pictures or something like that, please feel free to do so. I mentioned it last time, but I'll call out again. If you do want to watch the content back, it is all uploaded onto YouTube, onto the Google and YouTube Ireland channel. So you'll be able to watch all the content back. You'll see the presentation there. So if there's things that go by you can take your time and go through it in your own time. And then lastly, if you do have any burning questions, but you don't get a chance to ask perhaps at the end, or you don't feel comfortable perhaps asking in front of the whole audience, we'll have a couple of specialists afterwards. So Lauren Walsh, I believe, is going to be outside. Some of you will have met Lauren before, but she's one of our search and performance specialists. Conrado himself will be hanging around as well. So if you have any questions in particular around what Conrado presents, then you can ask Conrado afterwards as well. So I'll join you I'll join you back up on stage after the speech. We'll take a couple of questions. I'll introduce Conrado now. He is one of our technical specialists and knows more about analytics and websites than I can ever pretend to know myself. So he is the man for the job. So without further ado, I'll introduce Conrado. Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, I'm really sorry that so many people just came for first time and they have to deal with me. I am the technical specialist, as he will mention. This means that I support tickets analytics, means my life thing is I just solve the hardest questions you can find in analytics. So the first thing I want to mention is I love solving questions. So if any of you have questions at any point in my presentation, shout out. I love them. They are the biggest challenge and they are the most fun part to look at. So today, what we're going to look at, of course, what is analytics, why it's important, try and understand certain things on the data, specifically how analytics reports the data, how it receives it, because it's really hard to understand why it does certain things, and there are certain reports that are very complex. And then we're going to look at certain reports that I find super interesting, and really, I think that a company should know how to use them properly, to understand their users, understand how to segment them properly. And of course, then we'll look at success stories, like always. So before I start with what is analytics, how many of you actually have analytics activated on the website? A lot more than I thought. So, okay, it's interesting that you have it. Now, how many of you actually use it on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? I'm very impressed. So does that mean that the ones that didn't put the hands up in the last part, you just have it there and you look at it once in like a long time? Is it because you're scared of analytics, or is it too complex? I actually wonder. It's a product that even at Google people hate it, I must admit. I am one of the few freaky people that just loves it. I know it sounds weird. There's people that love football, there's people that love rugby. I just love analytics. It's not the best process, but there's people for everything. So let's start with what analytics is. You all know it. Seems like nearly everyone has it. So, well, it is the most widely used web analytics tool that tracks reports in website, mobile sites, and even apps. So what it does, it just records every user that comes on your website and understands what they're doing, where they came from, what are the demographics in terms of geolocation, and a lot of information within it. But more importantly, it reports data of users going in. So once, as he mentioned, once they arrive on your website, you can understand what they're doing, what your website is good at, what pages are interesting for the client, even if they convert, even if they arrive to a certain page that you like or submit a form. Now, I find that super interesting, maybe a little boring for some of you guys, but I actually just find it exciting, I know, just like that. So why is it important? Now, in this situation, now that we are in 2018, a lot of companies define everything by data. So we need data to define what the business plan is going to be in the future. So analytics is just pure 100% data. And it can be managed by you, it can be looked by you, it can be filtered by you, you can do everything you want with it. Of course, you can actually mess it up also, but if you don't do too many mess-ups, it actually shows you all the data you need to have on your website and how it works. So for me, it's just fantastic. But let's go into how it works and my expertise and not so much the sales side, because I'm not that good at that. So how it works, there's 4 different parts, which I'm going to be talking about. It's the collection part, which is all the coding involved. I'm going to do it very short, because all of you actually have it, so that's just fantastic. The processing, the configuration, of course, the reporting, which is the most important one. Now, please take into account, without the collection being done properly, the reporting is going to be a mess, a complete mess. It happens a lot, and all of the issues, or let's say 60% of the issues I receive, are actually because the collection is not done properly. So let's look at the collection. Well, you all know this little code here, which is a pain for most of the people, including me. I don't like JavaScript. But this little code is what analytics uses to understand someone arrived to my website. What happens is there is a page view. Within this page view, well, the load of your page just sends information to analytics saying this user with this cookie arrived to your website and went into this page. Of course, there's a lot more information behind it, but let's go into the simplest thing. It just tells you what happens. The other way to implement it is very simple, is the Google Tag Manager one. I can explain it at some point later if you actually want me to. I also love Google Tag Manager, another weird one. But let's go into understand the data, because you will understand the code. So understand the data. Hopefully, all of you have seen this page. This one is the overview page. I don't know if you recognize it. It's just the home page of analytics. That's where you will always start. Now, it shows you users, it shows you sessions, it shows you page per session, it shows you average session duration, and bounce rate. Now, I'm going to go into 3 specific ones, which I find super interesting, and I think everyone it looks like. So let's start with users. So users, how does analytics know you're a user, or you're just can be someone going to your website? Now, I can go into a website today, tomorrow, the day after. I am the same user. I'm just annoying your website every single day, and I'm not buying. What's wrong with me? But a user is defined depending on the cookie. Hopefully, we understand that every time there is a page view or there's the code behind it, analytics puts a cookie on your browser, which says, OK, this user, with a certain user number, completely encrypted, of course, will define this user went to your website at this time, at this point. You can always delete cache and cookies and all of this, and the user will be deleted. But most of the people are just marked by users. That one's very straightforward. Now, sessions. Let's start with how many of you actually use AdWords and have click session discrepancies, a typical thing that happens everywhere in the world. Well, then let's start with explaining what a session is. So we all know that a session is when someone arrives to your page, right? Well, it is technically when someone arrives to the page. There are certain parameters where define if it's going to be a session or it's going to maintain the same session. Now, if I go in a website now and in 20 minutes, it would actually be the same session. If I go in a website now and in 31 minutes, it'll be 2 sessions. That's just the way it works in analytics. But there's a lot of different situations. The click session discrepancy, I'll explain it right after this part, which is how analytics understands where everything's coming from and what happens in my side of the world. So then let's look at bounce rate. I actually had a case 2 days ago where someone, a client in UK actually, had an issue where they were saying, my bounce rate is 90% and I don't believe it. And it's like, okay, it's fantastic. You don't believe it. Neither do I. But how am I going to check if a bounce rate is high or not? How analytics defines bounce rate. Do we all know how it does? Okay, let's look at bounce rate. So bounce rate is just how it works. It means someone arrived to your page, the first page. He didn't interact on the website, and he left. Now interact. That can be a lot of things. Interact means there was no page view. There was no event. There was absolutely nothing. The person just scrolled up or down and closed it. If you went to another page, that means it's not a bounce rate. Now, there's so many different ways where you can actually affect bounce rate. If I were to be very cheeky and just trigger 2 page views on the landing page, I would have 0% bounce rate. If you want to do that trick to make it look like your website is fantastic, feel free to do it. If someone looks at it, they won't believe it so much, but it happens. There's people that do it, surprisingly not, specifically startups. But they actually do it a lot. I am so sorry, but my brother has a startup and he tried to do it, and he's not very smart. So yeah, bounce rate. There's a lot better ways to do it. So you can actually trigger an event for someone that stayed on your page for 30 seconds, for a minute, for 2 minutes. You can even trigger an event for someone scrolling down 75% of your page or 100% of your page. Now, the problem with analytics is there needs to be an interaction. So if I am on your site and I've been 30 minutes on your site and you left, it will still be a bounce rate. So it's really important that if your page is a one-page URL or a lot of users just stay on the page most of the time, you actually track how long this page has been, or try and understand that bounce rate is not going to be as true for you. So either you do an event or you don't look at bounce rate. That is the reality. But we can look at later bounce rate if you want. As you can see, I'm very annoying with these things. But let's go into how metrics and all these numbers and all of the dimensions look into analytics. So analytics divides everything into 2. It says dimensions and metrics. Dimensions are very straightforward. It's everything that's not a number. So it would be everything like location, so which city, which country you're coming from, which traffic source you're coming from, which browser tab, which operating system. All of this data is in analytics. They are, of course, called dimensions. Then there's the metrics side, which is how many visits happened, how many sessions, how many users, all the numbers in analytics. It's just that when you look into analytics and reporting, you will see that when you start clicking on things, you will see something's green and something's blue. Now, that happens because there's metrics, there's dimensions, and there are certain metrics and dimensions that don't work well together, or you cannot put them together. For example, certain clicks and certain locations. But we can look at that later. So, as we looked before, we said there were a lot of click sessions discrepancies that happen in AdWords with analytics. So I'll try and explain it basics with this traffic sources part. Now, traffic sources is where analytics understands where you're coming from. So I could have come from Facebook. I clicked on a Facebook ad and appeared on your lovely website. Now, we know there's so many potential ways into your website. There's 10 million. There is going through Twitter, going through Bing, going through Facebook, going through Instagram, even going directly, or there's a million options. How does analytics know? Trust me, we do not have a Google Analytics code in every single website in the world. We cannot do that. That's a little bit illegal. So don't worry, that doesn't happen. So what do? It works with the URL. So that means, in AdWords, for example, when I click on an ad, you will actually see, once you click on an ad, there's going to be the URL, let's say google.com. And then after that, you will see like a small parameter called giglet. It will say literally giglet and equals a very long group of numbers and letters, which is an encrypted version of which campaign this person is coming from, which account, which keyword, and all of this information, that is passed to analytics. Now, that means that URL is how analytics sees who you are and where you came from. So, as a company, if that URL is not properly placed there or something happens to that giglet and it changes, analytics cannot read it. So that's what happens with clicks and session discrepancies. What happens is I click on the ad. It's very lovely. Automatically, Google puts this giglet parameter or this parameter, and for some reason, there's a redirect on your site, and that parameter disappears. What happens there? Well, you will arrive to a page view where it says google.com without any parameter, and it would assume it's organic. You would assume it's direct none, which means I've got no idea where it's coming from. So that's what happens a lot. You will see that if you see 100 clicks and at least more than 100 sessions, that means something's like it's correct. But if you have less than the same amount of clicks, there's something wrong, and we need to find out what happens. Now, I'm the person that does that every time. There's a lot more complex situations than the parameters. There's a lot of different server issues, and I will actually look into that. But let's try and explain why it's happening. So when you go into all traffic, into source medium, you'll find this thing on the right. I know it's a little bit blurry, and I'm sorry for that. But you will see that it says Google CPC, Facebook CPC, and so many other options. Now, Google CPC is the one that is defined by the auto-tagging, which is the AdWords part. Now, that is fine. AdWords is part of Google, Analytics is Google. We have this gclit thing. Now, if you're coming from Facebook, from Instagram, from Twitter, how many of you know what you should do to track them properly? Interesting. So, the same way that we add something on the URL, you can add something on the Facebook URL. It doesn't matter, it's just a parameter. Meaning the final URL will contain something called UTMs, which are these things on the left. So you would see actually someone put UTM equals YouTube, UTM source equals YouTube, UTM medium equals referral. Someone put that on their own template. That means I can go into your website, put UTM equals Conrado, and UTM medium equals test, and you will see on your site someone, Conrado test, went into your website. Of course, no one would understand it, and no one actually will filter through it. But that's my way to test websites. So you can actually test a lot of things with analytics. But it's very important to understand that. So let's look into how auto-tagging works. So as I mentioned earlier, auto-tagging is just a tick on AdWords. For the ones that don't have AdWords, don't worry about this. We're going to look at how it works for other things. But this is the lovely thing of everything that's not AdWords. So what happens here is you will just add your website, let's say example.com or google.com. You will define a campaign source and campaign medium. Those are two that are needed, or I would actually recommend. Source is the one that's actually full-on needed. But it's important to define, OK, I came from Facebook, but the question is, did I came organically? Did I pay? Was it display? Or was it so many other options? Now, we can see that, and analytics will report it in the report we saw before. So this is just a tool that you can find online, and we can send an email later. I'm not sure how it works, but it's just the campaign URL builder. If you literally search for that, you will find the first one. It's just a simple way for you to create an ad. You know your final URL for your ad for Facebook, or even organic things. Doesn't really matter. What happens here is you put that in your final URL, which means the final URL will contain on Facebook. Someone will click on your ad. They will arrive to google.com/facebook-cpc with the URL, with like the UTMs, and analytics will report it in the report before. Now, this is all the side of one report in analytics. Take account, there's around 300. So that's a good starting point. So let's go into fancier reports, because that one is just how people arrive, which is the basics. Once you have the people arriving, you can actually look at proper data and go like, OK, I know where people are coming from. Let's look at what they're doing. Let's look at who they are. Let's do where they're coming from, but specifically within campaigns, and compare them. Let's look at what the value is, right? As a company, the main objective is the last one, is the value one. And of course, there's the real-time report. That one I will not go into depth. It's literally just a report showing at this current time, there's this amount of users on your page, and they are doing this. That's what it does. So let's start with audience reports. So who is coming to my website? Audience. Probably reminds you to remarketing, and all these audience things tend to be interesting and quite annoying. So audiences, how we create segments, how we analyze people are coming from. Like, where are they coming from? Now, there's very nice reports in analytics, such as, let's say, this one. This one is pretty awesome. It literally just shows you in a map, very specifically, OK, this is a lovely map. There's a lot of users coming from US. This is the Google Merchandise Store, which, as you can understand, makes sense. A lot of people tend to look at it in US, but also some in India. But this is very easy. This is just a generic report for everyone to see. Now, as a company, you don't only want to see a country, right? You want to see a city. Well, down here, at the very bottom, when you see primary dimensions, you see country, city, continent, subcontinent. You can actually just, if you were to click on US, you would actually see at the city level or even a county level what happens. Like how many users come from this specific city. So this is a generic report. If you literally just start clicking on the map, you will go in depth within it. And this is, in this case, you're just looking at users, so the amount of users that went into your website. Now, you can look at it in terms of transactions. How many transactions happened in different parts of the world? Or how many sessions, how much revenue? There's so many things that you can be done just with this little map. This is one of my favorite reports, just because it looks pretty, but it means a lot if you actually know how in-depth it can go into. So let's try and compare now mobile devices. We went into, okay, where they're coming from. Now, the other question is, which device they're using. Analytics actually knows that. I'm also surprised that we actually know it. I don't know how we do it, but I probably do know how. But now, it actually shows the report in terms of every single device that went into your website. And you can actually filter and see in terms of users, in terms of sessions, even in terms of e-commerce conversion rate. Now, I'm sorry, I know I'm working Google. As you can see, Google Pixel is the one that converts the most. I know it sounds like you don't believe it, but that is the report I took out. I was not going to change the reports just to be a little bit more fair. It's just what happens. It's true that as a person that uses Pixel, I would buy more Google things, I guess. I don't know if 230% more, but we'll see. So yeah, this report is just fantastic. It just explains in every single device on mobile how many people went in and the e-commerce. Now, you are creating a lot of campaigns in terms of mobile, and you know your performance in terms of different devices. Imagine if you could segment in terms of which devices. That would be just fantastic. But yeah, let's go to other reports, because who are these people? It's very straightforward. Now, that is just an IP address, that is just the browser they're using, the device you're using. Maybe it's not extremely interesting for you guys. Let's look into acquisition reports. So where are these users coming from? So source medium, all traffic, comparing different campaigns. Now, how many of you have more than one advertising media, meaning AdWords on Facebook and AdWords on Instagram? Well, this is actually the report to compare every single one of them. Analytics does not only look at AdWords, as you all know. It looks at every single campaign that comes into your website. It doesn't matter if it's Google, if it's Facebook, if it's anything you want. Even your organic Gmail ads that you want to send to people, it doesn't have to be an ad. You just email people. You can actually track that through UTMs. So, acquisition. How complex can it be? Now, they're coming from here. There's sessions. There's e-commerce. How do you mix them all together? Well, of course, there's so many reports, but let's start with channels. Now, channels means from different type of advertising. It can be social, it can be search, it can be anything, affiliates, display, so many different channels that appear in analytics. You can actually compare them just by different metrics that you want to compare. Now, as a company that goes into e-commerce, like Google, in terms of a merchandise store, you would actually look at e-commerce conversion rate, transactions, in terms of revenue. Now, if I were to be a company that just wants to see a lot of people going into my website, so being interested in my website, or even forums, you can create goals for forums. There's so many different options within analytics. Later, I will actually create a small demo and go into an analytics account, and I'll be looking forward to you guys actually asking me what kind of report you would like to see. So please come in and ask me questions. That's what I'm waiting for. But this one's very straightforward. As you can see, most of analytics reports are just different lines, a lot of data, and a little graph on top. Now, graphs are pretty. Graph makes sense. But for this report, it's not that interesting, because it looks at all the reports, so overall of all the users. So it's all the 13,000 users and how it looks like. You can always edit that graph and plot different graphs for different lines. But we can look at later in terms of graphs. But let's look at Search Console. How many of you guys use Search Console or know what it is? Let's start with that. Nice. So for the ones that don't know, Search Console is all this organic traffic that comes from Google. So you can link analytics with Search Console. This means analytics will have the data of which keywords people look at, hopefully. It will look at which position you had organically, never in terms of ads. It will look at where they came from. So you can actually track all of the people that came organically, how many converted. This is literally free, right? Which is pretty fantastic. Now, there's so many reports in Search Console. It's a pain. It's a pain to go through every single one of them. This one's the one I like the most. It's the generic one. It just goes into everything. Now, in analytics, you can always just click on United States, and it will actually compare with you every single city within the United States. And you can actually choose, let's say I want to create advertisement for US, but if I put US, that means it's far too big. It's going to be extremely expensive in terms of CPC, right? Or that's what I think. I'm not an AdWords expert. I'm more of an analytics one, but that's how it works. So in analytics, you can actually do all of that. Now, here you're comparing country. You can compare city. You can compare country. There's so many options. It's just a pain to look at every single one of them. I wish I had more time to just go one-on-one with all of you and explain to you certain things in analytics. It's a pity. But let's go into behavior. Now, we looked at where they came from. What are they, like, who they are. And now let's look at what are they doing on their website. This one's can be a little more interesting, and it's not as available in other platforms. So let's look at mobile. We looked at mobile earlier, but how many of you have a lot of users coming through mobile? Well, there was been like 2 years ago, there was the moment where users were coming more from more from mobile than desktop, meaning people are using more mobile to go on Google than desktop. That's surprising, and that's why it's so important mobile. You probably heard a lot about this, a lot more than actually me, but let's go into it. So I looked into data, and I could see that the average time it takes to a fully load mobile page is 22 seconds. Seriously, how many of you would wait 22 seconds on your phone to actually see whatever happens on the other side? I have to be very interested. Like, there's no way I will wait 22 seconds. That's a waste of my time. I would wait 2, 3, never longer. Now, someone actually analyzed this. I like this person. Now, 53% of users abandon a mobile site if it takes more than 3 seconds. That sounds a little bit more like me. If I were to have to wait 22 seconds for a mobile site to load, there's no way. It doesn't matter what you're selling. I will not look at it. It takes far too long. I would think it's an error from my phone. I would think the website is working wrong. I would think so many different options, but not that it's just slow. That never happens. Now, why is this important? How can analytics help? Surprised? Surprised or not, analytics can actually compare the speed of your site to your desktop site, depending on which mobile happens. So let's look at reports yet again. Now, this one's a little bit more interesting. It actually has a little bit more of a plot, and it has segments. So it's a little bit more in depth. So let's start with, on the top, you can see I segmented, which means I said, OK, I want to compare mobile with tablet and desktop. So I want to compare what the speed is for both of them. And that's what you can see here on the left. The top one says the average load time for tablet and desktop is 3.8 seconds, which I'm sorry, Google, but that's not that good. And then you have the mobile traffic, 5 seconds to load. I would not buy something in the merchandise store. I personally just won't. It takes too long. So if I were to look at the graph, there are certain days, like this one and that one, where it takes too long. So if I were to be a company that can see these spikes, I would actually love to understand what happened those days. Was it because there was a spike in users? Was it because I'm changing the app? Was it because there was a certain new version that I'm doing? Or was it because the site just crashed that day? It's super interesting for me to actually go like, OK, there was something wrong this specific day. Let's go into it. Let's go and understand it. And that's how you can start with it. But now we saw generically the average in terms of mobile and desktop. Not specifically which pages, not specifically where it happens. Maybe you have one page that is just a pain. You have 10 million pictures in it. It takes a long time to load. That happens. I've seen it. I had to deal with it. So yeah, believe it or not, we actually have that. So analytics has freaking everything that you can find in terms of site speed, in terms of sessions. But this report is very straightforward and actually has this pretty thing here that is just fantastic, which is it compares from the average of your site. So the average of the site takes 4 seconds to load. So these are the pages, so the URLs where certain pages are faster or slower. It is compared between the page views. So if you're interested in pages that people look at it a lot, you can see that this one here, that one's very terrific, meaning it takes 90% more time to load than the average. Maybe there's something wrong in that site. Maybe you have to go into that site and go, OK, I have a lot of pictures. I'll have to either make them smaller, decrease the dimensions, make them load faster, maybe set them up so it loads at a certain different time, or maybe put the page view analytics faster. there's so many options you can do on your site. Probably your developers or even you know better than me the server side. I know the analytics side. But yeah, this is just fantastic. I love the graphs. It is super interesting. But now I'm going to do a small live demo. I will show you what I would do just to analyze the mobile conversion rate for organic search. So just give me a second. Hopefully it works, because I'm changing computer. Or it doesn't work. Can we actually change it? Yeah, there we go. So that's what we were seeing before. It's just the overview of analytics, right? So this works fine. Now, if I were to look at different channels, it's just acquisition. Go down, if I can. All traffic and channels. Now, this will compare all the channels like we saw before. So you will see a library report of organic search, direct, referral, social, affiliates. Now, this is for every single user in your site. You want to filter or segment or do something so it's only mobile. There's two different options. I will actually do both so it makes sense. But there's one segment, which is literally just mobile traffic, which is extremely straightforward. It literally just says, OK, let's look at only mobile traffic. And it will filter everything and compare it between all your other sites. So here you can see e-commerce conversion rate for organic search on mobile traffic. Now, the other option is creating a secondary dimension. Do you guys create secondary dimensions and segments when you go into analytics? I wonder why. I need to explain segments then some other day. I really hope so. Now, segments, and while this loads, let's look at segments and secondary dimensions. In analytics, you will always see a first line. This first line is your primary dimension. You're looking at organic search. Now, that's great. You want to look at organic search. But analytics is a data thing, like we mentioned earlier. If you were to look at only one dimension, it's pretty boring. But you can actually put always a secondary dimension, which is every single dimension and metrics that you have in analytics. And you can actually say, OK, from the organic search, this amount of people were on desktop, this amount of people were on mobile, and then compare them or look at them. You can do that the same through segments, but imagine being able to create a segment with a specific condition that I will show you. There's so many conditions you can add, because I created as just a basic segment, the ones that are just created automatically. But there's very defined and advanced conditions that you can create. You can even look to conversion probability, exit page. You can just put every single parameter you want, and you can say, OK, I want to see only people that had more than one transaction. More than one transaction, which is everybody that converted. That is very simple. But you can compare every report in terms of the people that had transactions. Let's look at them. Let's compare every single one. Let's see all the ones that, where they came from, or which city, or which device, or which browser. Maybe you want to specify only advertising to Safari if you would like. You can do it, but you can actually see why. The main thing of analytics is, why should I do this? And it will show you all the reports. Does anyone have any questions on segments and things like that? I can, because after that, I'm going to go into goals, and I will, hopefully, you won't forget what I just mentioned. Yeah.
Sorry, when you're dividing mobile and desktop speeds, how do you determine the speed of the connection?
It determines between page views and page views. It's a timestamp.
Okay.
So the time it takes for the page view to load. Yeah.
Channel grouping is not always correct.
It's a default channel grouping that is done in analytics. But if you would like to actually do your own, you can create your own custom channel grouping. You can perfectly do that.
Do you recommend modifying the default grouping or creating?
I prefer always the default channel grouping because for support, it's easier on my side. But I do understand that if you want to see your reporting in a certain way, it is really useful to go into in-depth channel grouping.
Okay.
It actually depends on you. It's your data. Yep.
Mobile web gives you the reach. The mobile apps give you the
Just going to
engagement.
pass you the,
Yes.
just so everybody can hear, if you don't mind.
Mobile webs give you the reach, but mobile apps give you the engagement. Have you any measures on speed for mobile apps?
There's certain, like in analytics specifically, not so much. If you want to go into apps, there's something called Google Firebase, which is the analytics version for apps. So through that, you can actually measure a lot of things through apps. It will implement an SDK on your app, and it will actually measure exactly the same things in analytics, a little bit different in a different way, but it will measure it through screens instead of page, but it will measure all these things.
Thank you.
No worries. So, okay, let's go into goals. Hopefully, it makes sense what I answered to everyone. As you can see, I enjoy questions, so just shout out. Wait. Can we go to the other slide? So yeah, let's look into goals. Now, first things first. If we don't know what a goal is for your website, there's no point in creating goals, right? Now, let's look at Amazon. I know it's a competitor, but let's look at Amazon. The main thing as a goal for Amazon is just to sell, like for all of us. There are so many different options, but it's important to understand how it's done. Now, to create a goal, let's first understand what you want to track. Here, what you want to track. So you can track leads, you can try a demo, you can watch a video, you can look at certain download of a page, you can look at time spent, social buttons, anything you want. Literally anything you want. You can actually trigger whatever. Even if it's, I want them to scroll 99% of the website. You can do that. That works. Now, how it's done. There's 4 different ways. There's URLs. So depending on, okay, they arrived to the thank you page. Goal. Fantastic. Then there's the time on the page, which is, as we mentioned earlier, we looked at so much about time things, but it's just, okay, if someone was more than 5 minutes on the page, let's put a goal. Pages per visit. This one is a little bit more challenging, but it actually works perfectly. So you had a visit, how many pages or sessions you've seen. Fantastic. Now, events. This one's a little bit more tricky, because this one depends on events. Events means that you have to change the code, or through Google Tag Manager, create an event and send it to analytics. This means through HTML or through JavaScript, you can just go on your site and say to analytics, okay, when this happens, say that this was an event for this. Analytics will read it, and we'll put it as a goal. It's just literally that simple. I mean, it's still HTML, but it's simple. And how to create it in the analytics report is, once you go in analytics, sorry for the blurry part. Once you go into analytics and you go to admin and goals, and create a new goal, you will see this. First of all, you have to define what the goal setup is. So if you want it by URL, by time, by page visit, by events, I put it for destination, which means URL. And then you can just specify, okay, let's look at the destination. I want every time they arrive to a thank you page. I want every time they arrive to submit form. I want every time they arrive to specific URI. Now, please take in account, it's very important to know that you don't have to put the domain, so the host name. You don't have to put google.com. You just have to put what comes afterwards. Analytics will, if you put google.com, it would work. It's just not the correct way, and sometimes it doesn't work. So just to ensure, make sure you just put only URI. Of course, there's all the side of the value. You can specify a specific value every time the goal happens. Now, for goals, it's a constant value. So it will be 1 or 2 every single time. You cannot change it dynamically. That is e-commerce. And then there's the final view that we will look at it into right after. So let's look at conversions. We've all been to this site, hopefully. This one's the overview of all the goals that happen on your site. It's very straightforward. It specifies all the goals that you have, every single one, how many they had, what was, let's say, the conversion rate or abandon rate, and then, of course, the completions. And the pretty graph that I like. I just like graphs. So this one's very straightforward. It just explains every single goal that happened, how it happened, when it happened, in which moment of the day, what's the percentage of times it happens, and if you have value, in the second one you will see value. Now, for goals, the merchandise store does not have a value because it uses e-commerce. Now, let's look at the final visualization. This one's super fun, a little bit complicated, but it's fun. It's a little scary, but I really just find it super interesting in terms of understanding. Now, let's go back to Amazon. I'm Amazon. I want to sell. Okay, I can create a goal very simple saying, okay, when they arrive to thank you page, let's put a goal. Now, that's not really how it works, right? You would have to go on the site, search for a product, look at a product, look at details of the product, add to cart, look at the billing and shipping and set it up, look at the payment, and then review your payment and then pay. Now, that's a whole humongous process. We need to track that. We need to understand what happened and why it happened, how many left, how many didn't leave. That's exactly what this is for, right? It literally says the amount of people that went in, the amount of people that went out, at every single step of the funnel. Now, if you're in e-commerce, this is pretty fantastic. You can do it through e-commerce. This is for goals, but if you don't want to implement e-commerce because it's a little complicated, you can just do it through goals directly. So let's look at multi-channel funnels. This is a report that for some reason no one likes. No one likes, only me. But yeah, the reason for it is it seems strange and complicated. It seems. But once you understand what it's doing, it's very straightforward. Now, remember the page of the audiences where there was a very big blue page with a lot of different interactions and all the things that can happen in the real world, right? Now, if we look at conversions in AdWords, conversions in Facebook, you can see, okay, in terms of attribution, the last click was this one, therefore the conversion goes to that one. We all know that never happens. How many of you just go on Facebook once, go see a product and buy it? I don't do it that many times. Sometimes I do it, I have to admit. But it happens. Now, this one explains to you not only the conversions that happened, but which path the user went through to arrive to that conversion. When I say path, it doesn't mean which pages he sees in your site. That is also there, but this is another report. This is only conversions. This means of the source mediums, of the default grouping channel, which different default grouping channels the user went through before he converted. Now, luckily here in this one, we won't see Facebook and Instagram and all these things because we don't do advertisement here. But you can see that there's a lot of situations where people go through referral, direct, organic search, referral. Now, these are all different ways people went into the website before converting. It's important to know how it happened and why it happens. When you go into analytics, and everybody that has here AdWords, I'm 100% sure you had the issue where there's a discrepancy between analytics and AdWords in terms of attribution. Or in reporting, right? Because you're looking at the same data. Now, most of the time, it's because of this. Most of the time, it's because AdWords will look at the data and say, okay, AdWords had something to do with this conversion, so it's a conversion from AdWords. But analytics will go like, okay, there's 10 million different paths. Which one should I choose? It actually just chooses the last one, but there's so many other attribution models. But as a default, AdWords will just look at AdWords. You can change it. Of course, there's so many options. But here it shows you specifically what happened, how it happened, and it gives you the empowerment of knowing what is happening here and how they convert. I just have a lot of passion for this one. I'm sorry if I took too long to explain it. But for me, it's the basics of understanding conversions. It's the basic of understanding your site. So the other one I actually really enjoy is this one. Time lag. I know it sounds like lag. No, it's not that bad. Time lag is just saying how long a person takes from the first time they went on your site, a user takes from the first time they went to your site to the time it converted. Now, if I'm a company that does mortgages, how long would you take to convert? Not 1 day, not 2 days. You would probably take months. Now, this one is for e-commerce, merchandise store, which is pretty straightforward. Most of the people just go the first time and convert, which is very easy. But if you're a mortgage, you actually will see that this graph, this one up here, you will find here. Why? Because people take a lot longer to convert depending on the price, right? Now, it's really nice and really good to see how long it takes. Now, then if we look at AdWords attribution, yet again, AdWords looks at the time of the AdWords click, Analytics looks at the time of the conversion. So this explains that discrepancy itself. So the previous one explains the attribution difference in terms of which default grouping channel or which click is in charge of that conversion. And this one defines how long, or what's the difference between AdWords and Analytics. So for the AdWords people, this makes sense. Just so you know, Facebook works exactly the same. I use AdWords because it's in Google. Facebook works exactly the same. When you convert, it will attribute it to Facebook if it's Facebook in there. Analytics will do exactly this. Sometimes I don't know why I put these yellow things. But yeah. Actually, does anyone have any questions on the conversion side? Because I know I go a little bit more in depth on it. Okay, sorry about that. If you have questions on the multi-channel funnels in terms of the time lag report. Oh yeah.
Hi, Conrad.
Yeah.
On multi-channel conversions, if I can place a UTM code, I can track a CPC campaign. What about the display campaign with let's say, view-through attribution or
When you say
that
display
it doesn't
campaign,
come.
it
Yeah,
means AdWords display or any other thing?
Well, like the linear, we were talking about a few months ago about linear campaigns with click-through campaigns and any other data type of.
Can you explain a little bit better in terms of like, because display, you can always just put UTMs and say this campaign was display, CPC, which means it was display and I paid for it. And you would see it there. And it would just actually say display. Depends on the far group and channels that she explained. That remember that analytics just automatically has a default for it. If you want to actually have it separate and say, okay, display, I want it completely separate to default grouping channels, you can actually create that and say, okay, I want to see it completely separate. For impressions, it's a little bit more complicated though.
Yes, it's more complicated to
Analytics
track.
and view-through don't go well so much, specifically because the cookies of analytics are based on your page. They are not based on any other pages.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, is there anything that maybe in the future Google is coming up with?
View-through conversions?
Yeah.
I mean, AdWords has something like that. In terms of analytics, I know we are working on something for it. In terms of a beta for it, it's just that there are so many issues now with all this GDPR thing you probably all heard of, and this new ITP issue, and there's a lot of things coming through, so it's going to be complicated to go through with it.
Okay.
But we'll do our best, definitely.
Thank you, Conrad.
For anyone else has a question on this? Okay, fantastic. Hopefully later you'd ask more. Bless you. So let's look at success stories, because I've talked about reports, just generic reports, and I did not explain why it was good, why it was bad. What are we doing? Because that's the main thing, right? Now, Etihad Airways, they actually wanted to reach customers who left the website tunnel, website funnel. So did you remember before that we had a whole funnel? Well, you can literally just use that. We basically use that, just the e-commerce version, to try and segment users and go like, okay, this was the add to cart, this was not the add to cart. This person looked at the impression, this person looked at the details, and we specified for it. We did a lot of things with them in terms of analytics to measure everything better. Now, what they dealt with, what finalized, we increased the site speed because they wanted to deliver a better user experience. Yet again, we looked at device speed. And then they improved their return on investment, which is pretty nice for them, hopefully for us in the future. So let's look at Virgin Experience Days. Now, their objective was to maximize order and revenue, and import order volume and product specific things. Yet again, we looked at every single data within. We analyzed all the user behavior within the site. We looked at different segments that could have happened. And what happened is there was a 71% increase in revenue and a 34% increase in return on investment, which is pretty impressive. Now, this is just what we did for them. Hopefully, we can do a lot more for you. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Conrado. Although my brain is quite sore, I think you've demonstrated the power and the value that analytics has for us. And I think that's probably the takeaway for all of us here today, is that there's probably a responsibility for us to leverage the power of analytics. I think there's an ungodly amount of data that we can learn and insight that we can learn from how people are interacting with our businesses and our websites that can enrich our strategies going forward. So I think that's probably the takeaway going forward. We're going to take a couple of questions, and as I said, Conrado and Lauren will be outside if you do have any specific questions for afterwards, but we'll go to the audience now and we'll take 2 or 3 questions. If anyone has any burning questions, now is your chance to fire away at Conrado. Hands up. One here in the front, right, Lindy?
Do we have the box?
Hi, Conrado. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, so my question has to do with mobile users. And a lot of users now are coming from mobile devices. And I know for most of my clients, it would be around 70–80%. Yeah, quite a few. Some of them are only 50 to 60%, but the bulk of them would be 70–80%. I read a statistic that said that 70-some% of mobile users do not click past the first page. And maybe that's because of the time to load or whatever, but this is one of the reasons it's given. Like if you go to presentations and stuff, they say make sure the user can get there in 1 or 2 clicks, or make sure you have longer web pages or whatever. So if someone comes to the page on a mobile device, which the bulk of them are, and they're not clicking, does that become, a bounce?
Yes.
It does.
Yep.
Even if they're interested, but they're, I suppose, yeah. So it is.
I mean,
Okay.
technically, yes, but you can always send certain information to analytics to say if this person was on the website. So if you send an event on the site for that person scrolling 50% on your site,
Yeah.
that will make it not a bounce rate. You can actually choose how to measure your bounce rate. You can actually define either by scrolling, either by time. You can actually put a timer where it works like this person entered the website, in 30 seconds, send an event. If that person was 30 seconds on the website, I don't know how long it takes to read your website, but you can define how long. And from that, you can say, okay, now my bounce rate is actually optimized, and I know when it is actually a bounce rate or not. Analytics just does it through page views and through interactions. The interactions, you can always send them as much as you can.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Just behind you, actually, there, over your right shoulder. Thank you.
Hi. Does Google penalise for a high bounce rate, or is it just an indication to us?
It's an indication fully to you.
Okay.
Short and sweet. Just coming over here to the side.
Hi. In terms of creating goals, particularly in our case, we use a third-party e-commerce site. So when someone clicks through to our website to go and purchase, then they leave our site. What's the best practice for trying to track them and actually view proper conversions, I suppose?
Do you want to see in AdWords or in analytics generically?
In analytics generically, so obviously we can check how many people come to the point of sale, but then we're essentially manually comparing our sales versus that final.
Once someone buys on the page, do they arrive to your thank you page afterwards? On their page?
No, because it's done externally. It's done through like an iframe, essentially.
Iframes are tough.
Yeah.
There is a way to track cross-domain traffic. Okay. If you're able to touch the URL of theirs. If you're not, you can actually ask them to send a virtual page view to analytics.
Okay.
This means you can tell this third-party tracking that what they do is once someone buys, it will send information to analytics saying, okay, someone reached a page that you fake, basically, and telling them they arrived to a thank you page with this e-commerce value, this and this product. You can send that information.
And is that the best way? Because obviously a lot of third parties aren't very forthcoming with allowing you to put codes through there. So is the best way is like I don't need to know all the in-betweens, but the thank you page is what I'm interested in.
If it's only a thank you page, I would say it's the best and the easiest.
Yeah.
It also depends a lot on which the third-party tracking and how it works.
Okay.
I don't know how much power you have on available tools they have to send information afterwards. There has to be something for sure. If not, you can actually, I'm sure that order arrives to you at some point in your backend, right?
No, not really. Like it's done through. We use a software that's provided by them. So.
But that software says that you should send the product to someone. I'm guessing.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
So, if you know that, you knew that someone bought the product.
Yeah.
So you can say this person bought a product as long as you maintain a user ID.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. We'll take one more, guys, before we wrap it up. Just down here, actually, in the front, actually. Yep.
Hi. So I've been working in a e-commerce project and on data Google Analytics accounts on the report, acquisition report, and source medium. I've seen unbelievable stuff that on organic search traffic, the bounce rate was less than 1%. So would be a Google tag error? So be what is?
This is, well, as I mentioned earlier to her, the bounce rate is defined by you. Okay. You can have your analytics tag on your website, But you can trick the system in any way you want to have an X%. You can literally just put, they were 1 second on the page, trigger an event. That would mean you would probably have 1% bounce rate. The way to check that is arrive to the page, and there's something called Tag Assistant. You've probably used it, hopefully. That actually shows which tags are happening on the page. It's free, don't worry, it's just an extension. Once you press on it, it shows you Google Analytics tag was firing. If you click on it, you will be able to see one. If it's a page view, it generically always has a page view. And then if it was an event and when it happened. So probably what they were doing is, okay, they entered on the page, and as soon as it scrolled 1%, as soon as it passed 1 second, they sent another event. And that is technically tricking the system for them, because that reporting is fully for them. So they can do as they wish, but...
So that would be that, so yeah. Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody. So, guys, that brings us to the end of the breakfast briefing. For those of you that were first-timers here today, I should state that there will be a feedback form that will go out, and when you submit your feedback, you can then get access to the presentation that Conrado's gone through. It is quite technical, and as I said, the video will then be up on Google and YouTube Ireland as well, so you can watch it back and take your time and go through it that way as well. So please join me in giving Conrado a big round of applause.